Hey you guys, welcome back to Flickers of Fear. Yes, I finally got around to seeing this. So I'd been noticing a lot of interest and buzz surrounding this movie, which of course came out in 2022 and is called Barbarian. Now this movie actually premiered at the San Diego Comic-Con last summer. I think it was like late July, but I wasn't entirely sure like what the nature of the buzz was. And to be honest, I was kind of hoping that I could keep it that way because as I've mentioned many times on this channel, I really like to go into all movies, not just this one, knowing as little about them as possible. Now, I did have a couple of friends, a couple of you guys out there did recommend that I see it, but didn't give me any specifics, thankfully. And I have to say that in the case of Barbarian, I'm really, really glad that I was successfully able to avoid seeing any reviews or any spoilers or anything about like anyone's opinion or about the movie or anything like that before going in to watch it, because as pretty much every reviewer, like after I saw it, like I went and read other reviews and like watched other people's videos about it, and every single one of them says this movie is way better if you go into it having no idea like what you're in for. And I'm gonna add my opinion about that to the pile. This is absolutely way better like one of these movies if you have no idea what's gonna happen, because I didn't, and it was fun time. And I'm gonna say like right here from the jump, even though I'm not gonna spoil the movie outright, because you know it's still actually playing in some theaters after all this time, and it only recently arrived on HBO Max, which is where I watched it. So I understand that not everyone has had a chance to see it yet, because Christ, look how long it took me to see it. I'm gonna try and discuss it in a way that isn't like too explicitly spoilery, but I might still kind of like reveal some plot details that it would probably be like more fun for you not to know beforehand. And as I said, I'm going to reiterate, I strongly recommend that you go into this film with as little foreknowledge as you can manage. But on the other hand, in order to talk about the movie to any like degree of depth or talk about some of the things I liked about it, some aspects of the plot might be like inadvertently exposed. Like I said, I'm not gonna spoil it outright or like say exactly where it goes, because you know I don't want to do that because it's like really new. But I'm just saying that I might reveal some stuff that you would rather like not know ahead of time. So you know, please listener beware. Now, incredibly, mind-blowingly, Barbarian is actually the product of a first-time feature writer-director whose name is Zach Kreger, and his kind of previous claim to fame was as one of three founding members, three guys in a comedy troupe from New York City called The Whitest Guys You Know. I haven't seen any of their stuff, so I don't know if I've heard it's funny, but I don't know. Now, while it's inarguably true that comedy and horror are explicitly linked. I mean, just kind of like they're kind of like, you know, two sides of the same coin pretty much, because they both have to do with setup and payoff like in particular ways and of evoking like a strong reaction. So even though I know that, it always surprises me, and I don't know why it does, but it always surprises me that when someone who is like really into comedy and stuff like that, it turns out to be really good at horror. I mean, the same thing happened with Jordan Peele, and I was surprised in that case too, and I don't know why I was. But this one really surprised me because, like I said, I didn't know like the guy's comedic stuff like beforehand, but the fact that he could come out and make a horror movie this assured, this confident, like his first time around is crazy to me. And that's just like, that's amazing. I love when that happens. I mean, and the thing about this movie too is that it really, I mean, it's almost like masterful, just the way that the humor and the horror is like intermingled, like to the great enhancement of both. I mean, you know, a lot of horror films try to add humor to sort of lighten up or to complement the more kind of like scary or ghastly elements of the story. But I find that not really that many succeed in finding that perfect balance. But I think Barbarian gets it exactly right, which is really kind of like a Herculean feat in itself, I guess. Now, that's not to say that Barbarian is a horror comedy. It absolutely is not. It's very far from that, so please don't get that impression. In fact, the movie is actually very tense, very suspenseful. It's actually scary in parts, and it also is very gruesome in places, though in other places it knows like when to pull back and when to be restrained. Again, like a very great balance. But it also knows that there are times when humor is called for, and there are times when details of the plot kind of maybe skirt the boundaries of believability a little bit, and the movie kind of very admirably like leans into this, and it's just like a fantastic effect all around. So in short, in case you couldn't tell, Barbarian is easily one of the best horror movies I've seen in a long time, and it did something that a lot of horror movies can't or won't do. It actually surprised me. Like, it challenged my expectations. It went in directions that I couldn't foresee, which is really something in itself, because, you know, I've watched horror movies my whole life. You pretty much know the drill. You know how it's going to go. But this one, not at all. Not at all. It wasn't afraid to subvert storytelling norms, and it would kind of trusted its audience to, like, keep up. It didn't handhold you or anything like that, which I thought was really cool. It was just refreshing and fun, and it's just like, it's completely bonkers, a wild ride that literally had me on the edge of my chair the whole time, wondering what exactly the fuck was going on. You know what I mean? Like, I had no idea. It gave me vaguely the same sort of feeling as, you know, James Wan's recent film Malignant, just in terms of sheer audacity, I guess, though Barbarian is like way, way, way better than that movie. You know what I mean? That one was like real audacious and stuff, but it was kind of, I don't know, that one was bonkers. This one's bonkers, but in a slightly different way, but in a way that's also sort of similar, like, if that makes any sense. Yeah, because this movie, again, it's batshit insane, but in the best possible way. And at heart, too, it actually, like, had quite a bit to say, but it didn't really hit you over the head with its theming. Like, you didn't really have to, you know, take from it if you wanted to, but it was there if you wanted to take it. I mean, it's still remembered to be just like this entertaining, unpredictable, actually frightening, and also like blackly comic movie experience. You know what I mean? Like, it remembered to be all of that. Now, I can't really tell you how happy I am that this movie kind of came out of nowhere a little bit and was this good, and that it turned out to be like a sleeper hit. I think it only cost like $4 or $5 million to make and ended up making like several times that back, because Barbarian, in case you didn't know, was actually released by a major studio, 20th Century Studios, matter of fact. And that kind of like, and the fact that it was successful gives me hope that we'll maybe see some more like interesting, real ballsy horror films like this from new and untested talent. I mean, you know, you hear that, Hollywood? More like this, please. Like, this was really, really good. So anyway, I mean, the synopsis and the trailer of this film, which I watched the trailer after I saw the movie. I don't usually watch trailers unless I happen to see them, like if I'm at the movie theater or anything like that, but I don't usually seek them out because, like I said, I like going into things completely blind. But I did watch the trailer afterward because I was curious as to how they marketed it. So the synopsis and the trailer, they very deliberately kept them vague so that audiences wouldn't quite know what to expect when they sat down to watch it, and that was absolutely the right move, as I mentioned. Basically, all the description says is that this is a story about a woman who rents an Airbnb, finds out there's already a guy staying there, and then decides to spend the night anyway, but finds out that there's a lot more going on than just like a strange dude in her rental house. Now, this is an accurate depiction of the first act of the film, but after that point, it takes several drastic turns. And watching it, I mean, I absolutely loved the experience of having no idea, like, where this movie was taking me. And for a while, like, I was initially trying to guess what was happening. I'm like, oh, it's going to be like this. How much you want to bet? Blah, blah, blah. But after a couple times of doing that and getting it wrong, I just kind of like was like, Jenny, why are you trying to guess? Just like chill out and let the story go where it's going to go, and let it take you on this peculiar journey that it's on. And once I kind of like got into that, I was just like, yeah, this is good. I'm just going to let it take me on a ride. And I suggest that that's the way that you watch it, because if you try to guess where it's going, you're probably not going to guess. So Georgina Campbell is in this, and she is phenomenal. She plays kind of one of the main characters, Tess. And she's this young woman who has come to Detroit for a job interview with a local indie filmmaker. Now, she arrives at her Airbnb, which she has booked, in the middle of a stormy night. And in spite of the instructions from the property management company, which she gets texted to her, she finds that the key isn't in the lockbox where it's supposed to be. So she then discovers, much to her chagrin and annoyance, that there's a man named Keith, played by Bill Skarsgård, in a very ingenious bit of casting, which if you've seen the movie, you'll know why that is. He's already staying in the house, and he insisted that he's like, look, I paid to rent this place like for this date too, and it's like they're trying to comparing each other's bookings and stuff like that. Long story short, it turns out that she rented through Airbnb, he rented through HomeAway, like a different app, and apparently the house was double booked. Now, Keith actually like invites her in while she tries to get everything sorted out, like to find another place to stay or whatever. But of course, I mean, she doesn't know this guy from Adam, right? I mean, it appears as though all of this was an honest mistake. You know, shit does happen. But who's to know for sure, really? I mean, this guy could, for example, he could just be squatting here, or maybe he owns the place and this is like a setup he does, like to lure people into his house or something like that. I mean, the guy seems okay, but he's a little bit awkward, and he's also played by Pennywise, so you know what I mean? So we're inclined to be like a little suspicious of this fellow. So I mean, this whole first act is like amazingly suspenseful. I mean, it's beautifully shot, it's very, very eerie, it's very effective. I mean, the whole time, like I said, it's just really tense. Like, Tess is on a razor's edge. I mean, she's just unsure, like, should I trust this man? I'm kind of stuck. You know, she calls around, there's no other hotels like available because there's a convention in town or something like that. So she's kind of stuck there. And one thing that actually really resonated with me that she says like a little bit later on is that had the situation here been reversed, like in other words, had she already been in the house and then this strange dude like turned up on her doorstep like claiming there was a mix-up or whatever, there would have been absolutely no way that she would have invited the man inside and like much less let him crash there. And I mean, rightfully so, you'd kind of be dumb to do that. But she points out, she's like, well, Keith, the man, he didn't even like hesitate at all, like to let her in because he didn't feel like he had anything to fear from her. And that scenario is absolutely not the same way, the other way around. And this fact is something that the story utilizes with much deviousness, which is as far as I'll go. So, I mean, like the conversations and the interactions that they have in this whole first act are just like really outstanding buildup. I mean, Tess is kind of like feeling out the whole deal, you know, like I said, he's kind of like saying kind of the right things, but he's also like a little bit awkward, so you're not really sure like what his deal is and stuff. I mean, and Tess is kind of wondering, have I just made the stupidest decision of my whole life? Am I about to get murdered or whatever? Now, eventually, like she does let her guard down just a little bit, and she even tells Keith about a tendency to keep going back to her controlling boyfriend, even though she knows that she shouldn't. And this is a personality trait that will absolutely like play out into the story like going forward, which again, that's as far as I'm going to go on that. Now, she actually, like, they have kind of a pleasant evening. She bids Keith goodnight, and it seems like everything is gonna be all right. You know what I mean? Like, it's not as bad as she was, like, fearing. But then she's awakened in the middle of the night by a weird noise, and she discovers that her bedroom door, which she very explicitly like closed before she went to sleep, is now open. Now, obviously, she thinks that the worst has happened and her suspicions about Keith were absolutely correct. But when she goes out in the living room, she finds that he's like asleep on the couch, and he's kind of seemingly like in the middle of a nightmare, like he's talking in his sleep and everything like that. Now, she wakes him up, and he seems to genuinely have no idea. Like, what she's talking about is like, I've been sleeping here the whole time. And then we see in the background that the door to presumably the basement appears to close by itself. So at this point, you're wondering, like, what the fuck is going on in this house? Is there someone else in here? Like, is it haunted? Like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? There's like lots of scenarios that are like playing out in your mind. So as the first act goes on, Tess ends up getting trapped down in the basement. Like, she has to go down there like to get extra toilet paper, and the door ends up like closing and locking behind her. Now, while she's down in the basement, which like I said isn't really a spoiler because they kind of show a little bit of that on the poster, she ends up finding some pretty sketchy ass shit that nobody would want to find in the basement of a house that they're staying in. You know, that's all I'm going to say about that. And from there, like, more events unfold that I won't spoil. But after this bit, like the first act with the two of them like plays out, there's actually a hard cut to what seems like, at first, a completely different movie. And this movie is starring Justin Long, who I love. He was great in Tusk, and he was in Jeepers Creepers, too. But it stars Justin Long as a very cocky, very carefree actor in Los Angeles, and he's tooling around in a convertible on a sunny day. And you're asking yourself, what does this have to do with the initial story, which was concerning Tess and Keith? Why, in fact, do Tess and Keith disappear, essentially, for the next section of the movie? And to that I will say, just be patient, because it will all come together in time, as will some other seemingly unrelated kind of interstitials featuring Richard Brake being very, very creepy, as he's very, very good at. I mean, from a plotting and screenwriting standpoint, this is like a masterclass. It absolutely does not follow like the tried and true conventions of filmmaking or storytelling, which is one of the reasons that nobody wanted to make it initially. Hell, I think even A24 like passed on it. But that's one of the reasons that I found it so compelling. It wasn't more of the same. It was doing something different, and it still kept you engaged the whole time, because you're trying to like figure out what's happening and how everything is connected. I have to say too that all the acting here is great. The casting here is brilliant, and it essentially uses both Bill Skarsgård's and Justin Long's like previous on-screen roles and their kind of perceived personas as both shorthand and misdirection. And again, that's all I'm going to say about that. Cinematography also outstanding, and it was doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of like visual storytelling, particularly in its really interesting and sometimes unconventional use of light and shadow. Like, one example I'll give of that is that usually in horror movies specifically, like, you know, bad shit happens when it's like dark outside, which it does in this one too. But I thought an interesting subversion of that was that when she first arrives at the Airbnb, which like I said is in Detroit, it's dark and she can't really see like the neighborhood, or she's heard that it's like a sketchy neighborhood or whatever. This house is like the nice house on the block or whatever, but she's heard that it's a sketchy neighborhood. She can't really see it because it's dark. And there's a great thing where she like kind of goes out the next day when she's on the way to her job interview, and she sees the neighborhood that she's been staying in like in the daylight, and it looks like, you can imagine, it looks like an abandoned fucking neighborhood in Detroit. And the fact that they use the light in that way, like in a subversive kind of way, because usually like in a horror movie when something's light, it's like, oh, it's happier, it's better and stuff like that. But in this case, like, light made everything worse. And I thought that was like a really interesting like subversion of the light and shadow dynamic. But that's kind of the only example I'm going to give, because that happened like fairly early in the movie. I mean, I personally found no particular flaw with this film, and matter of fact, I loved it so much that I'm already anticipating a second watch, because I want to like pick up on some stuff that I probably missed the first time around. Now, I did see a couple of reviewers who, while most reviewers I've seen like absolutely loved this, and I'm totally on board with that, but a couple of them did bring up a minor criticism that they thought the characters made some dumb decisions that maybe real people wouldn't make if confronted with the same circumstances. Now, I can see where they're coming from on that, but honestly, I didn't find anything here that was particularly egregious in that regard. I mean, for one thing, people do dumb things in horror movies sometimes. I mean, shit, they even have like a whole like spoof like Geico commercial about it, for Christ's sake. Let's go hide behind the chainsaws. You know, kind of stuff like that. And to be honest, as horror fans, we usually let that slide because, you know, honestly, nothing would happen in a horror movie if somebody didn't go down and explore the creepy basement or the woods or whatever. But I mean, even aside from that kind of glib excuse or justification, I also felt that Barbarian in particular was very careful in setting up the characters' personalities in such a way that their behavior made sense in context. So the decisions that they made like came across as believable and organic to me. I mean, maybe they aren't necessarily the decisions that I would have made, in other words, but other people aren't me. And the way that the character of Tess in particular was set up or was delineated acted in ways that maybe I wouldn't have, but were still understandable from the perspective of her own values and attributes and things like that. She acted in character, in other words. So if this all sounds kind of vague, I do apologize for that, but I'm also doing that deliberately because if you haven't seen Barbarian, I want you to be able to experience the same kind of crazy ride that I went on with this movie when I watched it. I get that it's not going to be to everyone's taste. It does seem to be getting like overwhelmingly positive reviews, which I totally see. But again, there's always going to be some people that aren't going to love it for whatever reason, and that's fair. That's fine too. You know, some people might not, for example, like the really hard plot twists that this takes, or doesn't, or might not like not knowing where it's going. Like maybe some people would want to know what to expect and stuff like that. And this one is not a movie that you want to watch if you just want like something traditional that you kind of know what's coming and everything. But I mean, for me, like as a lifelong horror fan, I always kind of like love and cherish the times when I come across something like this, something that engages me as much as this movie did, that kind of like keeps me on my toes the whole time and shows me something surprising. You know what I mean? I'm not saying this movie like reinvented the wheel or anything like that, but it just went in ways that you didn't expect, and that's really, really refreshing. And you don't see it that much in horror anymore. I mean, if indeed you ever really saw it, because like I said, horror has, you know, genre conventions just like everything else does. So it's kind of cool when you see something that does something that you're not expecting. Only regret, I wish that I had got off my lazy ass and gone to see it in the theater, because I've heard that it's an even more fun time, like seeing it with an audience, which I totally get. Like now that I've seen the movie, I'm like, yeah, this would have been like a lot of fun, like seeing it with other people, like reacting to it. But I mean, even just watching it by myself, I had a total blast with it. And, you know, I would absolutely unreservedly recommend it. Like I said, not everyone's gonna love it, but it does seem like most people that I reviewed like really liked it, and I can totally see that, because I really loved this. I thought it was great, so I'm really looking forward to what this writer-director does next, because man, if this was his first thing, then that's pretty awesome, you know what I mean? So it's been a good year for horror, matter of fact, now that I think about it. And that'll do it for this Flickers of Fear. Thanks you guys for watching. Remember to like the video. I always forget to say that, but I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.